Paul, I really, really appreciate you being here with me on the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast, here specifically to chat about your book, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. I've spent a good deal of time of the last month or so with this book, as well as Drawdown, your book before, comparing and contrasting and trying to pay attention to what I noticed was different in my experience of digesting one versus the other. But I'm interested to hear, because I heard you mention this on another interview you did. You knew Regeneration was going to be the sequel to Drawdown. When you published Drawdown, did you know that there was going to be a sequel?
Yes.
Or did that take a year or so to evolve?
No, I was planning on Regeneration prior to publication of Drawdown. And I knew why and what for. The why was that when you write a book or create a book, it's best to stay in your lane. What I mean by that is say what you're going to do it, and then say what you did. You know, I mean, that's like a good speech. Say what you're going to say it, and tell people what you said. I mean, the same thing with a book. The temptation with the book is to sort of peel off in certain directions. You know, they're more than digressions, you know, and to take on more. And if there's anything that can take on more, is climate crisis and climate as a whole. I mean, there's so many different aspects of it. And what Drawdown was, what it emerged from was really, you know, my experience in 2001, you know, which was that we didn't know then what the most substantive solutions were to reversing global warming. And number two, collectively, we hadn't named the goal. And the goal then and now still seems to be mitigating, fighting, combating, tackling, and, you know, climate change. We can talk about that more. But I'm just saying is we hadn't named the goal, and we hadn't determined whether, in fact, we had the wherewithal and the means and the understanding to achieve the goal of net zero by 2050 at that time. And so Drawdown was about mapping, measuring, and modeling the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming, period. And we stayed right there. And I knew that Drawdown was a what could be done book. I mean, it's like, here it is. These solutions are scaling. This is what they would cost. This is what you would save. And, but they were global. There's just a global modeling. And with all due respect to ourselves and to extraordinary research people, Chad Fishman in particular, who headed up research, there's no such thing as global. I mean, it doesn't exist. And so people love the ranking. They love the metrics of 1, 2, 3, the number 3 solution, number 6, you know, all that. Especially Americans love that, but especially in Europe too, and Germanic countries, you know, very proper, very orderly, you know, and so forth. But, and I think, you know, we did a good job on that, accepting there's two things that are different, which is one is that the top solutions, for a New Zealand, for a Botswana, for a Belgium, for a Boston are different. They're not the same at all. Some of them are common, of course, in terms of energy sources, for sure. But beyond that, and beyond food itself and food systems, it actually, they splinter and go in different directions. And so I knew that and especially after it was published, but I knew beforehand that it was a what could be done book. Regeneration is how to get it done. And it's a bigger framing, and it's a bigger arms, and it is very much about accomplishing it as opposed to identifying it.
And I as well caught that maybe one of the most common questions that you got in Q&As as you were perhaps traveling, doing speaking circuits, workshops, and things related to Drawdown was, you know, what do I do and how do I make a difference? How does the individual make a difference? in another interview I listened to with you, you said that your wife mentioned, Jasmine, that she'd leave you if you didn't tell her what to do in this next book that you're creating in Regeneration. And so I'm wondering, one, was your wife satisfied with Regeneration? And two, maybe not what's your answer to that question, what people ask, but how do you feel when hearing that question currently? The what do I do? How do I personally make a difference?
Well, there's a paradox here about what can I do. And, starting in, 2001, British Petroleum, with the help of Ogilvy and Mather, or maybe the other way around, but in other words, created the carbon footprint, idea of the carbon footprint, and that this is, you could calculate your footprint, and this is what you could do, sort of making British Petroleum look like, hey, we just drill holes in the ground and make gasoline, you're the one who's driving, and so this is what you can do, and they took this out of the tobacco industry playbook, you're smoking, we just make cigarettes. It's like,
right.
And advertise them and sell them to children. It was just so bizarre. And, but actually people care about it, and people said, okay, what can I do? And even before then, of course, but, there was a great deal of so many things you can do to save the earth and whatever, these mottos, and they're all good. And they're all meaningful. But if you could stack them all together, they wouldn't be anywhere nearly sufficient to the task at hand. And I think most individuals realize that and could see that they should put the recycling bin out, and they should use cold water in the washing machine, and they should eat less meat, perhaps, if that was not so evident 20 years ago, but certainly now. And, be careful about how many, your clothing, how much you buy, and how to keep it, and buying secondhand clothing, and, all that sort of stuff. There's so many things that you can do as an individual, and they're very important, not only in the impact they have or don't have, as the case may be, but also in terms of reminding yourself every single day that you live on a planet, and to step lightly, so to speak. At the same time, I think because people knew, as individuals, that it was insufficient to the task at hand, then there was a tendency to say, well, are they going to do something? They were big corporates, the big government, and now next week, the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow. So there was a tendency to look to these very, very large institutions, as being the key, as being the ones who had the throw weight, the heft, the ability to make the really big changes that are needed in order to stem the climate crisis and so forth. But then if you look at those institutions, big corporates, big government, and the Conference of the Parties, it's been 25 years of complete disappointment, frankly. And it's not to say business hasn't made progress in certain areas, but it's been the businesses that are in the industry of renewable energy, turbines, and so forth. Those companies, those engineers, those inventors, those innovators have been spectacular. But the corporations that are basically destroying the earth, that are taking the earth, that are harming life, that are degenerating life, are now paying much greater lip service to net zero and our commitments and offsets and all that sort of stuff. And so that's a big change. But up until now, there hasn't been that. And so what Regeneration is about is like, wow, there's a big difference between an individual and, say, Procter and Gamble. There's the space in between is agency. It's us, it's groups, it's cities, companies, people, it's classes, it's schools, it's our neighborhood, it's our communities, it's our church, there's all these ways in which human beings can figure in networks and work together, know each other, trust each other. And we love to solve problems together. That's why we're Homo sapiens. That's why we're here. That's why the Neanderthals aren't, that's because we did that and they didn't. And so we're still that way. And what we're trying to point to in Regeneration is that that's where it happens, And so it starts with an individual. It does, an individual talks to a friend, a neighbor, family friend or somebody at the company, and things can grow. But those are where the solutions belong. They're all local end of the day. There are no such thing as global solutions. And who's local? Well, human beings.
Mm. I mean, it's so much of what you mentioned there that is the frustrating experience of it. The looking at, perhaps the largest, biggest offenders and seeing perhaps, what capacity and mass amount of resources and influence that they have to feel so insignificant in what actions you might take. And I think Regeneration is a really good response to that. And I noticed myself just reading, feeling far more inspired and empowered and hopeful, which isn't often the experience that I have in consuming content related to how we do address this climate crisis, be it reporting or as well other more long form content. It's a difficult subject to touch on because it is, I'm sure, very frustrating to the journalists, the authors, whomever reporting on it and writing about it. But I really do appreciate the different experience that I had in the way in which you describe something like a completely different vision for how it is that we approach this. And one thing in particular I'd love to touch on, if you could expound on, you mentioned exactly that it's not necessarily a solutions problem that we have, but it's a lack of imagination. And I think this is where, really gets into the substance of regeneration. But I'd love to hear more about that, because if we have all the solutions, and we do, I literally have the book Drawdown right here on my desk. They're all here. We have all the tactics and the approaches. Well, what is this imagination that you're talking about in regeneration that we're lacking?
Let me work backwards at one. Drawdown does not have all the solutions. The website of Regeneration has all the Drawdown solutions. All the regeneration solutions are not in Drawdown, and solutions from other organizations as well. There's no such thing as a Drawdown solution. People say, oh, it's a Drawdown solution. No, it's not. We know where we got them. and there's solutions. But it's the largest listing in the world of climate solutions and challenges, by the way, and how to get them done. And that's what Nexus is. It's really the purpose of the book and so forth. In terms of imagination, what freezes the imagination is the amygdala every time. And basically, the way we've communicated about climate is scientifically impeccable. I don't argue that one at all. But originally it was based on future existential threat. It's an existential threat for sure. A threat causes fear. Remote originally, not so remote now. And then it was picked up by activists who used blame and shaming and guilt and finger pointing and so forth. Also accurate in terms of who they were pointing their fingers to, no question about it. So I don't decry either one. I think they're both right. However, from a communication point of view, which we talked about earlier, I mean, the humans don't respond that way to guilt, shame, blame, fear, threat. It's too much. And so the emphasis has been on the probabilities of what's going to go wrong, how fast and how faster it's going to go wronger. This is and even more so this year than ever before for real reasons. But what that has tended to do is actually shut people down, even if they're sympathetic and empathetic to the over And so regeneration, one of the things I knew then and at Drawdown, but know now too, but I talk about it now, is that over 98% of the people in the world are completely disengaged from doing anything. And you say, come on, I've said that before, and people say, oh no, that's not true. It's not true. I've seen the latest polls, yeah, 50% of Americans think we should do something. No question about it. And that government should do something. The corporations should do something. That doesn't mean they are doing anything. They're not. And this is not just true in the United States. It's true everywhere in the world. And some cases, because they can't do anything, they live in impoverished conditions. We shouldn't expect them to. But we have to ask ourselves, I think, how do we get into a situation where we have basically a movement to really renew, restore, our license to be a civilization, and endure into the future, and have most of humanity basically checked out in terms of doing anything. And this is where imagination comes in, because we have not been imaginative. We have seen this as almost like, I was brought up Catholic. I was an altar boy. I mean, I was schooled in guilt. I was like, and then my friends were mostly, I lived in Berkeley, they're mostly Jewish, and they were too, you know, we knew this one cold, you know, and in a sense, you know, we've looked at it as kind of thing. We should wear sackcloth, and, you know, if we don't do this, we're screwed, you know, and that's, I mean, come on, that's what a lot of literature says, as Bill McKibben says. He's right. It's not that I disagree. It's just that it's not motivating. And what motivates us is very, very different. And we can be motivated to do something about it without abdicating or abnegating the science or the reality. And it's like Wendell Berry said, be joyous though you've considered all the facts. And so we have to say, got it. Wow. Amazing science, the most incredible collective science endeavor in human history. That is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And thank you. Wow. We've delayed. We haven't been working so hard that we should have been doing more earlier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what am I going to do? That's the question. And we know that if we try to browbeat people, try to guilt trip them, try to make them afraid and so forth, they're not going to join with us. You know, they're not going to get involved. And so unless the climate movement is a joyous expression of purpose, expression of purpose, it'll fail. And what regeneration, we can talk about this specifically, but regeneration as offers, not the book, the very core concept of regeneration offers possibilities and imagination and breakthroughs in a coming together that we've never had before, because it is already there within us, as opposed to something being sort of, you know, parachuted in.
And so from what I understand, you were as well involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s, doing some work with Martin Luther King Jr.'s folks, and as well acting as a staff photographer for the Congress of Racial Equality.
Right.
What overlap or patterns, differences do you see between a movement like that and what's evolving with the climate movement today? What's changed and what's different?
Well, what's interesting about going to the South during March on Montgomery, and then later with the CORE, you know, on voting rights and dealing with the Klan and Meridian, Mississippi, and things like that, is that you could see social injustice in such a stark and way, you know, I mean, it was black and white. I don't mean to pun on the colors of racial colors. I mean, just like, it was so clear. I mean, and horrible, by the way, and horrific. And I got to see hate really up close and personal. I look at the eyes of it, you know, and the people, and is very instructive, you know. But what I was seeing was ignorance, and it wasn't like the hateful people who were acting out of that hate. They were acting out of their education, out of their social mores that surrounded them, you know, and so forth. So that was something I could hold for the rest of my life and still do, and so forth. There's a lot of talk now about injustice, climate injustice, that caused by climate change, and, you know, people living in low-lying communities and in cities where there's no trees, where it gets hotter, and all the ways in which people who are less privileged, you know, are paying a higher price for the changes and so forth. And I'm going, wait a minute. Global warming is caused by social injustice. It's not it's an outcome as well. But I mean, let's go, you know, upstream, because you always want to go upstream when you're trying to fix something, not try to fix it downstream. And so we definitely have to address the suffering that's caused by climate change and the resilience that's needed and so forth. We also have to understand that it's caused by injustice. And what I mean by injustice is that we have an economic system. Every single sector, whether it's a service you receive or a product you purchase or make, has a supply chain. And you'd have to go a very short distance down that supply chain before you discover and see that it is taking life, that it is harming life, that it is destroying life. As a matter of fact, it's not like that's the intention of this clothing company or this department store or this basketball or this car or this whatever, it's like it just is. It's just true. There's no exception to it in terms of economic sectors. And so when you take life, you are degenerating life. And it's not just life in a biosphere sense, like a river or an ecosystem. It's also cultures and people and health and well-being and education and opportunity. That's being taken and as well, it's all forms of life and so forth. So the interesting situation we're in now, that's been true for a long time, but it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. No question about it. And we're at that inflection point. I think we're at an inflection point where we collectively, not everybody, but we can see that road, that degenerative path we've been walking and going on faster and faster and faster, we can see the end of that road. That's what the headlines are telling us. That's what the weather is telling us. That's what social unrest is telling us. That's what economic polarization is telling us. That's what, I can go on uprisings, all the, illegal, the militia in the world. And it's breaking down. And the world's breaking down. There's no question about it. So regeneration is simply saying, do we really want to go that way? How's that working for you? I'm not talking about the super rich, but I'm talking about most everybody else. And regeneration is a 180, saying, what if we had an economy that actually created more life instead of less? What an interesting idea. That is where the imagination comes in. And which is to reimagine what it means to be a human being on the earth at this time, given what we know and what it means to me. And I didn't coin the term. I'm not the leader of anything that's regenerative, but the reason it's called regeneration is because we have no choice. We can keep going where we're going, but sooner or later, we either regenerate life or we're not here at all. And I prefer that we make that choice now, because it just is so much more expansive and interesting and helpful and kind and compassionate and creative. And as opposed to what we know as neoliberal capitalism, which is highly destructive and is turning life into money by killing life. And, what good is that money on a dying planet? Not much good.
Right. I think that's extremely important to pay attention to, because so many of these very public, like net zero commitments, as an example, from the Amazons of the world, it's mitigating a negative impact, as opposed to exactly what you're talking about in being a complete 180 in a different direction. How can we just first do less harm, and then perhaps we can move more towards the orientation that you're suggesting. And in that, Paul, with that vision, I think it is both aspirational and very exciting, but I do think that there is the thing of, people start to think of what that means for them, or some sort of kind of personal, I guess, fear or threat to the way things are. Because you mentioned, the economic system, for one, it's like, how drastically and dramatically would the way of business as it's done, as an example, need to change for us to move towards a pathway of regeneration as opposed to strictly extractive, exploitative capitalism?
Well, yeah, I think the threat of economic and job loss has been hanging over people for decades about climate. You know, if we go what those liberals want to do, you know, you're going to lose your job. People and industries change all the time, you know, and so forth. Nobody talks about what we did to the poor typewriter workers, you know, the ones who made typewriters. Nobody cared about them, apparently. And so, but we're supposed to worry about, you know, coal barons, you know, and workers who are basically infecting their lungs and destroying their health and so forth. And we got to worry about them. We should worry about them, and what we should worry about them is by creating a just transition for them in terms of education. It's what Hillary Clinton should have said instead of calling people deplorable. She said, if I'm president, I'm going to go to West Virginia and the coal mining areas and basically thank them for years and years and decades of families being sickened and harmed by coal and powering this country. You are heroes. You're not not bad people and so forth. And I'll make sure everything I do in my administration is going to teach you and help you make a transition to clean industries and to educate your children and to thank you with gratitude from the American people. Okay, that's what we should have done, right? And but when you said about, you know, net zero is sort of offsetting a loss is not a gain, and that's what you're seeing right now. Is you're seeing, oh, I saw Delta, you'll be net zero by 2050. I'm fascinated to know, but they all say it's by offsets. I don't know. You know, Amazon says that, Microsoft says that, you know, I mean, P&G says that. Everybody's going to offset, you know. That doesn't work. First of all, 5% of the offsets actually sequester carbon. 95% don't. Half of those protect things which should be protected, okay? And if they weren't, they would then be deforested or exploited in such a way that would cause greenhouse gas emissions to be emitted. But the other half are called additionality, which means somebody was doing something and then somebody said, wow, you actually are preventing, you know, carbon emissions. Let me sell carbon credits, you know, to somebody who's going to buy them and put them on their balance sheet, you know. But the idea that it's a threat is, I think, upside down and back. Regeneration is a threat. It's degeneration that's the threat to our economic well-being. And so, because right now, I mean, if you look at it, what we're doing is we're stealing the future. We're taking the resources of future generations and combusting, burning, you know, deforesting, you know, making Amazon boxes, you know, out of the boreal forest now faster than the earth can regenerate, much, much faster. And whether it's the oceans or grasslands or wetlands or whether it's mangroves or whether it's fisheries, I mean, I can just go down the list and so forth. None of them are sustainable. None of them are regenerating. All of them are degenerating and so forth. So what we're doing is stealing the future. Regeneration is about economic activity that heals the future. And it's the default mode of life. As soon as you stop scraping, cutting, burning, poisoning the land or the oceans, in the case of overfishing, and the rate at which it rebounds and regenerates is astonishing. There's some essays in the book about that in regeneration. It is mind-blowing how quickly. And so the imagination is, what would an economic system look like that created more life than took life? And we already have one. And it's called regenerative agriculture. It's emblematic of what's possible because we have an industrial agricultural system that basically mines the soil. It turns the soil to dirt, you know, and uses chemicals basically to grow plants. You know, the soil is more of a medium, you know, than it is just to hold the plant up, basically, because the plants are on an IV drip, so to speak, of NPK fertilizers, which make weak plants. They may make big plants. They may make a lot of plants, but they're weak and they're subject to insect infestation. And you need pesticide. Well, that kills the pollinators, the bees, the butterflies, etc. And then it's created unhealthy soil, and that creates weeds, which are very unusual and very competitive with the plants, and then you have glyphosate and herbicides. And so now you have NPK and you have all these pesticides and herbicides, again, stir well, mix it up. And where you have the dead zone on the Gulf, poisoning of families, of cattle, of water wells, of well water. And you have food that's it's very deficient in terms of nutrition. It's the opposite of nutrient dense. It's nutrient sparse particularly in terms of minerals, because the roots don't have to go down as deep to get the macronutrients that they need because of artificial fertilizers and so forth. So you have a system that is actually degrading, and then farmers know that and they're feeling it, and they're being pressed in by their costs are going up to maintain their yields while the income that they're getting from their commodity crops is going down, and they're in trouble. And so that is economic danger, but the danger is coming from business as usual. And regenerative farming just flips that one. And it's all about making healthy soil. And healthy soil acts very differently in terms of the biota, the microbiome. It has a microbiome just like we do. And we know so much more than we ever did about that in the last 10 years on both sides, people and soil. It's a complex community, and that we don't nearly understand, but we know that the more complex and the more a biota is in the soil and so forth, interacting with itself, the healthier are the plants, and the more water soil can basically absorb, can infiltrate, because the structure of the soil changes from being hard pan and dense, to something that has aeration and porosity. And so you see farmers capturing 10, 20, even more, 30 in one case times more water per square whatever, per acre, per square meter, whatever, than before. And that means their soil now has returned to being a reservoir. It has resilience. So you have a drought, the plants do okay. You have too much rain, which you're seeing again and again. You just saw it in New England with the bomb cyclone. Then it can absorb the water. So you have resiliency. Now the plants, the roots go deeper. They can, because of the soil structure. There's more, that's where the minerals are. That's where they put the sugars. Photosynthesis is a sugar making process, and those sugars are exuded by the roots. Those roots then, those sugars are taken up by bacteria, and they feed them, and they enzymatically break down the rock, the sand, and the minerals, so that they make them bioavailable to the plant, which makes the plant healthier, stronger, more nutrient dense, healthier for animals, if it's animals who are eating it, healthier for people who eat the plants, or both. It doesn't make any difference. It creates, all health comes from the soil, and the costs go down for the farmer. Income goes up, or at least stays the same. So they're becoming profitable. They're not poisoning their kids, and they're not causing the dead zone all over the world in oceans where the runoff from agriculture is killing life. So this is an example of really regeneration this way or that way. I mean, and what you're seeing is that regenerative ag is as a complex and emergent technology, because these farmers are learning all sorts of, I say tricks in the best sense of the word. I mean, techniques and so forth that apply to their soil type, their crop type, their climatic conditions, and that are innovative. And this is not going back to the past. This is going to the future, which is why regenerative agriculture is just exploding right now in popularity. Because it works.
I mean, in that too, there's just so many different layers of things to be very excited and obsessive about, whether it's just the component of creating more nutrient dense food, so that as a product of what we consume and eat on a daily basis, we are all healthier, because that is undoubtedly a major issue, to the more, mechanical components of how a farmer can run their operation successfully, sustainably, and profitably. There's so many layers to that. And that was something that I did really enjoy, going section by section in Regeneration, of like constantly kind of exploding my mind in these depths of things that I had such little familiarity with. it's so simple and complex at the same time.
Right.
Oftentimes the solutions were kind of like, well, if we just leave it be, it will take care of itself. The issue is making sure that we leave those things be, protect those areas or those resources. One thing I really enjoyed, Paul, is that you bring this connection of meaning and purposeful work into this conversation of regeneration and addressing the climate crisis. I would be interested to hear more. What is meaningful and purposeful work to you, and what is the connection, the attractive, the appeal to that component as it relates to the climate crisis?
Well, I think one of the main drivers of depression in the world is a lack of purpose. We rarely hear about that. We hear a lot about depression, and we certainly hear about what's happening to, the newest cohort, not the very newest, but I mean, youth who are between 16 and 24, say, and, poll after poll, both in this country, but, Indonesia and UK and England and so all over the world, is showing that cohort is very anxious. 70% of people are experiencing anxiety, depression, fear, panic because of climate, and questioning whether to have children, whether they should at all. And I think 39% of that is questioning whether they should bring a child into the world at this time. And so if you feel that way, and then with all due respect, what does it mean if you go to work at Amazon? I mean, and you're watching overconsumption go flying down, flying out of there, from boxes made from virgin timber from the boreal forest, the largest stock of carbon in the world, on terrestrial systems, and you're seeing what people are buying, which is, oh my God, and, the 40% of it or more is coming from China, and you're there, and it'd be very difficult, the clever Amazon ads notwithstanding, to feel that you have a purposeful life. And if that isn't true there, and I don't speak for any Amazon employees and so forth, but it is definitely true for the 4.3 billion people who are impoverished. There's no such thing as a poor person. There's only people living in conditions that are impoverished. They don't have access to the energy, to the education, to the healthcare, to the housing, to the infrastructure, to the pure water that they need and deserve. And you see, I say, I think in the book somewhere, I would say, if you want to understand poverty, look to see who's benefiting, and you go again upstream, so to speak, or downstream, and depending how you look at it. And then you understand why people are poor, and what they're doing is basically they have jobs that are meaningless to them, at least, if not to the world as a whole. And I don't mean taking care of their children, their family, or having a garden. I mean their work life, and that's true in the United States too. I mean, fast food workers, find me a happy one. I mean, it's like, it's become meaningless in terms of, well, what is my life about, And when people do that, when they feel that, they turn to other things. They turn to groups, organizations, they become addicted. They turn to lots of things and so forth. I'm just saying, is the lack of purpose and meaning is a symptom of how far off we have come from creating just, fair, kind, compassionate, and abundant, I should say, societies, because this world is not abundant to most people at all. And yet it really is an abundant, beautiful earth. And so the thing about the climate solutions that and the challenges, by the way, but the solutions and the challenges that we go into detail in terms of the website and Nexus, is that if there wasn't a climatologist alive, or we didn't understand what was causing extreme weather, we would want to do every one of them because they have cascading benefits for people, for children, for families, for water, for animals, for biodiversity, for the future, for abundance, for food quality, for healthcare. And so we don't need to have an emergency. We don't need to go into crisis modality to know that these solutions just kick ass. But what they do, though, is they give people, when you look at those solutions, they give somebody, a mother or father or whomever, a son, a brother, whatever. They give that person a sense of meaning. Bringing the earth back to life brings you back to life. And what those who live in impoverished conditions often lack is not a sense of personal well-being and pride in terms of their spirit, but they often lack a sense of meaning in terms of what they do. And because we haven't created a society in which that is there. And as I said, the poverty doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to fix itself. And the regeneration, the fundamental principle of regeneration is for us to create the conditions for self-organization as opposed to organize the world or, fix it or, there's no it there to fix, it's us. And that's again goes back to the joyous expression of purpose. So if people feel that they're doing something, that the mother or father can come home from work and saying, this is what I did today in terms of degraded land restoration or whatever, there's so many examples. I mean, they're going to be proud for the children and say, oh, this is what my dad does, or this is what my mother does, or they both do, whatever, and this is missing, this is lacking, whether it's in Alabama or, or whether it's in Tanzania, or whether it's in, shanty towns, in Manila, I mean, all over the world, we are wasting the environment, we're wasting us, we're wasting ourselves, we're wasting people, in a sense. We've created a system that actually wastes people's lives.
I would undoubtedly agree. I think that's why we go through so many layers of sorting through, purpose and going through the existential, especially in our 20s and early years of wondering what we're supposed to do, and where are we supposed to fit in? What are our strengths? Is because it's very difficult to actually, in our current system, to find something that feels very purposeful and meaningful. We go to different layers of it to where, at a baseline, maybe there's a company that's providing good pay and good benefits and they're nice people, and then we rationalize that that's okay. But even still, the core of the work, what we're doing might not feel that purposeful to us. And so I really do love that positioning of what could be more motivating. What's a more important mission than restoring the health of our planet.
Well, you might have seen a piece in the New York Times today about McKinsey. 1,150 employees at McKinsey wrote a letter in the spring. It's just being published right now. And some quit, calling out McKinsey for basically helping, aiding, and abetting 43 of the most polluting companies in the world. And saying, what are you thinking? We don't want to be a part of an organization that does that. And again, so you can be highly paid and high status. It's very difficult to become a McKinsey consultant. I mean, very difficult. And yet, what's the purpose? So your example is spot on. In terms of just because it pays well doesn't mean it's got a good purpose. And
right,
yeah.
And that's what leaves a lot of young people continuing to sort and search for more. And, there is I think it's a parallel of a movement of like purpose-driven and mission-driven businesses that kind of have that appeal. That's become a little bit more popular, like the Certified B Corporation movement as one. People are attracted to work for companies like that because it's the idea or the promise is that it's more than just a job, that you are doing some work that is ideally going to benefit people outside of yourself. And so, Paul, I'm wondering as well. There's an event that's happening here, at least at the time of our recording, the COP26 in Glasgow. I'm curious, is there anything that you might pay attention to as an event like this happens, with these meetings of very large countries, corporations, all this kind of stuff? What are you paying attention to, if anything, as an event like this passes?
Almost nothing. The good thing about the meeting is the green zone. Okay, the green zone is where most of the people are. I think there's 20. They say 20,000 people there. 2,000 can get into the blue zone, which is the company and country representatives. The company being the rich companies, the sponsors, the ones who paid their way in, and just see what companies are they, like. But in the green zone, though, you have basically what I call activists and scientists and podcasters and all sorts of people, kind of like, their antenna are brushing against each other and exchanging pheromones and so forth, and learning and connections and so forth. I think that is actually kind of exciting. There's no headline that comes out of that. In other words, because it's not headline material, it's the real deal. It's how change happens, and so that part is really cool. Inside the blue zone, the 195 signatories to the UN framework on climate change who have a say at COP26. Each one of those countries goes there representing its own interest. That's their job. The person or persons who go there representing Namibia or representing Paraguay or representing, Indonesia have one job. Their job is to represent their country's interests. And so those interests vary. If you're an island nation with rising seas, your interest is to say, stop the shit, come on, it's our culture, it's our life, it's, it's everything. Okay. If you're a country like Indonesia that's still burning its forests for palm oil and now building roads into Kalimantan for fossil fuel exploration, well, your interest is very, very different, in terms of quelling anything that might cause a loss of funding or loans or investment or exploitation, and so the idea that 195 countries going to come to an agreement that is remotely on par with the task at hand, with the crisis on hand, is it's not unlikely. It is impossible. It's absolutely impossible, because their interests are not aligned. Unless your interests are aligned, this is what you can do in a community. This is what you can do in smaller geographical or regional areas and so forth. The things that unite people are much more important than what divides them and so forth. And you can come together, right, left, middle, center, religious, it doesn't matter. When you have those situations, people come together and they work together and they try to figure out how to solve problems together. That'll never happen on such a level. I'm not decrying the work of the UN framework on climate change and all the activity and hard work. And they're amazing people. They've thought about it. They're doing the best they can as the United Nations, to organize it. And it's very complicated in the process. The reason it's it was a 12-day conference is it takes so long to move through the massive bureaucratic processes, that are involved, with trying to come to an agreement, but it doesn't make me upset so much as I think it's just a pointer to where real change can occur. And real change occurs, it's local in the broadest and most specific sense of the word. It's not international. Wouldn't we love to have, an international covenant, that actually subordinates a country's interest to the whole of the world, to the whole of the earth, to future generations. I mean, but that's not going to happen. We have to do it differently.
Mm. Well, I think that just speaks to an important sentiment that you communicate throughout Regeneration, is that there can be this tendency to kind of hold your breath and wait and watch, especially, as you mentioned, the 60 or so % Americans who think that we should be doing something aggressively to act on climate, or that businesses should be making these changes and these moves. It's that same sort of feeling or sensation to be like, well, what's going to come out of this? Is it going to be something of significance or progress? And you feel a bit powerless. Just waiting and watching, it feels out of your control. And so I do think that that's important to communicate, because there's a big deal made out of it, in having any sort of overlap in climate or not. You probably know, if you're paying attention to the news, that that's happening this week, or, here in a few days anyways. And so I think I do really appreciate what you stress is that focus of, changes in your control. And it's just a matter about, where you look more so than deferring any sort of expectation or action.
Well, this is where social entrepreneurship comes in. Let's put it this way. In the blue zone, there's no social entrepreneurship going on. I mean, there's no entrepreneurship going on, whatever kind of entrepreneurship. Change comes from the margins, and, it doesn't come from the top. It just doesn't. Now, have countries prepared for it and tried to, increase their commitments, and sharpen up their policies and to impress and to conform? Yeah, they have. The United States has tried to, as we know. The UK talks a good talk. Many countries have really stepped up and said, get it, understand it. This is what we're committed to do. We'll see what those commitments total up to. But so far, what we know, because most of those commitments are already understood and have been publicized, it doesn't get us anywhere near to the IPCC goals, SR6 goals, basically special report number 6 came out last year, calling for basically a 45% reduction in fossil fuel combustion by 2030 and not to exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade. I mean, those are the goals of the IPCC. And I don't know, we'll have to look at it when it's all said and done, whether any country's commitments actually come close to that. Probably some will come close, smaller countries, but in toto it will not.
Well, that's important of what's to keep in mind. What is the ultimate, goal that was agreed upon? Paul, I do really want to be respectful of your time here. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. Before we wrap up, do you mind if I ask you a couple quick hit questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, first, what's maybe an additional book, film, or resource that you might recommend to folks if they're interested in some more interesting and unique views on the climate crisis outside of your book, Regeneration, that you might recommend?
What an interesting question. I look around me and I have stacks of books here, that I'm reading. I tend to go outside of the climate narrative to look at, I look at the book by Emergent Strategies. I'm going to hash up her name. Andrea Marie Brown. I forget her first name. So sorry. Emergent Strategies. Brilliant book about organization and organizing. Really, really brilliant. And really how to do it. And it makes sense as opposed to other organizational books. I think that one is really, really important. I'm reading, I'm reading Rooted. I'm reading so many, How to Be an Animal. It's a really, really great book. And Susan Samar's new book on plant communication or tree communication. I love that one. It's Monica Galliano's book on the same thing, on plant intelligence. I find that fascinating. I'm rereading some of Barry Lopez's work, and also on Horizon, his new book published before he died, about indigeneity. I'm a weird, I mean, I had asthma when I was a child, and my mother kept me in bed a lot, and I just read like a bookworm, I just read, and so, if you went to, there's a really beautiful book too by, Anna Lampke, a Stanford scientist, called Dopamine Nation. I found that really, really interesting to see how we have become addicted to dopamine, and not just in terms of our phones and social media, but obviously in terms of, drugs and themselves, and how it works, and why in a way that we may not understand, why this hormone has actually kind of screwed up our society in such a interesting way, and how it's being used by, the like button on Facebook, the like and share, talk about Dopamine Nation. They got that one perfectly. And so that's a really interesting book. I'm always trying to read things that give me a sense of the zeitgeist, like who are we? What are we thinking? How are we responding? And so, on the climate books themselves, I've read those books, and I don't find them quite so helpful, because they tend to be fear-based. They tend to be about a lot of jargon. I used a lot of jargon the last bit about SR6 and, IPCC and I15C, and also jargon, facts, metrics, ranking, like Drawdown did. Don't change people. They do not change people's minds. They do not motivate. So we have to make sure that we're speaking in a language that isn't climate parlance. Climate parlance is there the same way doctors in a hospital will talk in shorthand. Pilots will talk in shorthand. Football players on the field will talk in shorthand. Shorthand is very, very important. But in climate, that absolutely turns people off. It's useful to talk to somebody who's literate in the science and so forth, and so go do it. But to the 98%, it just falls on deaf ears. So I'm always looking for ways to understand things that are much more understandable and approachable in language that doesn't get blocked out by people's aversion to jargon, acronyms, and things that make them feel like they're not smart. Actually, they are smart, but when you use that kind of language, people will turn it against you because it makes them feel like not as smart, or it's just not interesting either. As writing, it's not so interesting. So that
absolutely
was a quick
agree.
question. How would the other?
Well, that's a good list of recommendations that we'll certainly have linked up. A next one for you is: are there any particular daily practices or maybe morning routines that you feel like you absolutely have to stick to, if anything?
I do, and I haven't been sticking to them, so I don't know if this is a hypocrite speaking now, because the response to the book has been overwhelming, but in the routine I should stick to and do when I have more time, and because I was up really early this morning doing Italy, a class in Italy for Stefano Borelli. And so there goes the meditation, there goes the yoga, there goes the hot water and lemon, it's like, and there goes the journaling, boom, 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 they're all gone, and then what happens is that's for an hour and a half, it's like, and then by then it's 9 o'clock or something. And then the day starts, the other day, this time zone day starts, and then I end up, doing this stuff at night instead of the morning. I did go outside this morning though, and we had the big storm, and it was so beautiful. 12 inches of rain in a day. And so I went out with the broom and rake and sort of, and I was just cleaning the pathways and all that sort of stuff. And the air smells so good. And so I did do one thing for myself before Italy, but it was just practically dark then too, you know. And then I fed the ravens. I've been feeding ravens for so long. We all know each other. We know the family. We know the siblings. We know who's there when they come. And it was so beautiful. I mean, I just I don't know, just how close they allow me to come to them in trust, you know, and just to see their beauty and listen to all the variety of calls they have. And I hear it in the morning, you know. If you don't see my house, but if I wake up and pull a curtain on the third floor, they're down far away. They actually can see me.
They're waiting for you.
They can see they're in trees, you know, and then they come down. And it's like, it's just such a, that beautiful experience. Some people say, what is the one thing I should do? You know, people are like, what's the one thing I should do? You know, and I think I disappoint most people when I tell them what it is. But it's really to find out where you live. Find out where you live, the soils, the migratory birds that are coming, where they come from and where are they going to and what are they eating while they're there. You know, same with the pollinators. You know, what are the wild bees and what are the beehive Italian bees, you know. You know, what are the names of the plants, the native plants? What are the ones that are invasive and introduced? What are the names of the trees? What are, you know, I mean, who lived on that land? You're living on probably unceded land from one of the 500 indigenous cultures in North America, or actually just America itself, Turtle Island. And it's really about, you know where that hummingbird nests. You know how it nests. You know how it sleeps at night. You know it sleeps upside down. You know it goes down 60 miles an hour when it's trying to show off in front of females. And you know how long it lives, and it has the same amount of heartbeats as an elephant. But it lives 2 years. An elephant lives, you know, over 100. I mean, just discovering, you know, the beauty of the world that you inhabit, even if it's in a suburb, it still is. Or the beauty of the world that was got covered over, you know, and destroyed, but wants to come back. And I feel like that sense of falling in love, you know, is the most important thing you can do. You know, if you want to protect what you love, it's just, that's so human. And it's a matter of expanding that love, you know, beyond one's kin and family and partner, you know, and maybe your home or whatever, to the unseen. You see it, you look at it, but you really, the unseen world around, the world around you, you know, and what it is saying to you, what it's manifesting, how it works, and the mystery of it. You know, that's what really, I mean, I kind of do some of that every day, trying to figure out, you know, wow. It's like, you know, I mean, and there's just so much beautiful literature on this and so forth. So yeah, that's what you should do. Find out where you live. Yeah.
I think that's an excellent recommendation. And it has me imagine that was something of your experience as you put together the different sections of this book, whether we're talking about marine protected areas or clean cook stoves or whatever it might be. I'm imagining you approach those subjects and topics in a similar way to what you just described there.
Yeah, I think there is resonance because Isabella Tree writes about wilding, you know, in an episode in Sussex, England, and what she and Charlie Burrell did. It's such a beautiful, beautiful essay, you know, where they took a farm that was failing, a big one that they inherited, and then ring fenced it, took down the interior fences, and brought in an ancient form of pigs, animals, and cattle, you know, ancient meaning a couple thousand years, and then let them go and didn't do anything. Didn't do anything. And in 20 years, they have more red listed species on their land. It went wild. It went completely wild. Than all the conservation areas in the UK combined. And they have the first nesting pair of white storks in the UK in 600 years.
Mm. Wow.
This is regeneration. This is what's there. And it's in us too. That's the thing. Our 30 trillion cells are regenerating every nanosecond. It's who we are. We are keystone species if we want to be. We can create more life in how we live. And step by step, we're not going to do it overnight, but learning. And that's why I love about the punch list, in the website. Look at all the punch lists. And these are what people commit to do in a month or a year or whatever. They decide, and sometimes they're companies or their classes, but this is their commitments. And the commitments are so beautiful and diverse and all over the place. And so you see regeneration, again, is so, in itself, so diverse. And what you can do is that it's not about, my Catholic upbringing again, being a good Catholic altar boy, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, and I'm sorry, I'm really, really, really sorry for my sins, It's like, it's more about celebrating what it means to be alive, and like, we're all going to die, so the question is not that. We don't have any question about it. I ask people, what are you afraid of? I'm thinking about climate, and I keep asking, it comes down to death, and I said, well, you don't have to worry about that one, because you are going to die. No worries. The question is, how are we going to live? That's the question. And do we want to live like in guilt? Do we want to live like in fear? Do we want to live like, if I don't do something, something terrible is going to happen? Or do we want to live in a way that is celebratory, that is engaging, that is joyous, that's where we have music, where we have friends, where we, honor, and have gratitude for being alive at all, and going out every morning and like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm alive, as opposed to thinking, self-doom scrolling. You don't need to do it, especially on climate. And those are the choices, and I think that we need to make every day. We don't have to if we don't want to, of course, but they can be made. I shouldn't say need to be, they can be made. And they lead to very different outcomes, and they lead to what you referred to earlier, which is the imagination. That's how the imagination comes to life, in that part of the brain, not the part of the brain that is fear-based.
Well, and as you as well say in the book, it's actions that start to form and change your beliefs. And we brought up the regenerative agriculture explosion for one. It's not necessarily easy work to take a conventional industrial farm to one that's regenerative. It's quite the process to get there. But I mean, surely talk about what is purposeful and meaning work, and then the rewards of that, as you're describing everything from the soil and the earthworms to the new types of birds that are nesting there or returning, and talk about such rewarding work and really, really incredible fruits of that labor.
And even those big farms, they're not stupid. They know it's a big transition. So they do one part of the farm first, and then the next part, and the next part. And they do it in such a way that they abate the risk, of loss of income, and they learn as they go. So, I mean, it's not like you can do this overnight, but what you can do is, it's like I said, it's a 180. Let's go this way together and learn and share. And who knows what we'll discover.
Absolutely agree. Very exciting vision, Paul. And before we finish up here, where's the best place for folks to keep up with you and Regeneration? Where do you think the most appropriate next actions are?
www.regeneration.org. And I get the info emails there. I get them all. And so does other people. We share. There's other inputs for Nexus. If you think there's something we should do or add or amend or suggest, we're very, very receptive to that. And then we haven't published it yet because we're just new and we're sort of understaffed and overwhelmed, but we'll publish the events thing really soon, maybe this week or next week. And then this podcast will be on coming events and, when you tell us when it will happen. And so
perfect.
We've been derelict in that place, but, and there's more. Yeah, but certainly that.
Lovely. Well, we'll have all things Regeneration linked up with our show post at growensemble.com. Paul, thank you once more. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Good. Thank you so much, Corey. And thanks for what you do. Really. That's what we're talking about, right?
Thank you.